Trouble coming, are we going down? Mother, daughter, and your brother too. Get your mind straight when it's up to you. Hey, you gotta see the storm a-coming. Hey, you gotta feel it coming through. Hey, you gotta see the storm a-coming. Whoa, it's coming after you. When the storm
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Greg Seagroves, and with another episode of Reflections of an Uncommon Common Man. And before we get started, we got Jimmy Catrone and we got Connor McDaniel here with us. And, of course, today's date is September the 21st, 2020. And anyway, how'd everything go Saturday night? Did your concert work out good?
Oh, we had a good little gig, yeah.
Yeah.
And a pretty good turnout, too.
Oh, good.
So all went well.
Your buddies show up and all that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. Well, we, let's see, what do we do? We couldn't make it that day because we went to Nashville, I think. I can't remember what we did, but we were on the other side of town.
It was your grandson's birthday.
That's right. We went to what's the name of that place?
Something with a fork in the name.
Caney Fork Catfish
Yeah.
House or whatever. Pretty good. Pretty good
It's
food.
all right. It was all right.
Did three of you have to stand outside the building and three inside the building? Or
No, we was
how'd you
all,
work that out?
there was about, 20 or 30 of us.
It'd be 3 in the building and about 20 outside,
Oh, okay.
if that was the case.
Now, right now, everything is hot in the news about the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. They hadn't even let her assume room temperature yet before all this controversy breaks out. Of course, that's what the Democrats do. They want to create trouble. They don't have any respect for the dead. When they said something to Trump, I heard he handled it pretty classy and, said the proper things about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I heard there was a funny thing on Facebook. I had a couple of Facebook friends. I wrote an article about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I had these two people said that Ruth Bader Ginsburg died last year, January of 2019, and that the one that died the other day was a stand-in for Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I'm thinking, okay, well, if that's the case, why didn't they get another stand-in? If this one died, why didn't they get another stand-in to take her place until after the election?
It's a good question.
I mean, it amazes me how dumb some people are.
Well, my question is
Bill,
the
I
Paul
think
McCartney
Bill
know
Gates
today?
handled the cloning on that, didn't he?
What's that?
I said Bill Gates handled the cloning?
Yeah, he probably did. He probably had something to do with
My
it.
question is the Paul McCartney that we know today, the real Paul McCartney?
I don't know. I don't care if he is the real Paul McCartney or whatever. My wife likes him, but I could care less,
Oh, yeah, you don't like the Beatles?
Huh?
You don't like the Beatles?
Oh, I love the Beatles, but he's long past being the Beatles now.
Well, that was a conspiracy theory back, when they were hot. It was Paul McCartney died and they replaced him.
With the what do they call that album? The White Album. What was it? The White Album?
Was it Revolver?
No, I think
where they were crossing the road and it was supposed to have some kind
Avenue
of
Road.
Abbey. Was it Abbey Road?
No, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Avenue Road.
If you play the web.
Well, there was a bunch of crap in Sgt. Pepper
Well, if you play the record backwards or something, it has a
Yeah,
message
I
in it.
can't.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Well, they did
like
the
that.
same thing with Sergeant Pepper. It was saying like he died if you fold the cover or if you fold the jacket a certain way. Apparently, it says something about him dying.
Yeah, I remember stuff about that. But no, the Beatles, I liked them up until they started getting weird. You know, I mean, when they first started out, you know, and they were real famous, they were. But, you know, I liked them. But when they got into all that psychedelic crap and all that, you know, I mean, they still put out some pretty good stuff. But, you know, they got kind of weird on me, which a lot of these groups, you know, do that. But, well, anyway, getting back to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, first of all, you know, I really, although I knew she was left wing, I knew what she stood for today. I don't like to really criticize anyone until I really know about them. So I did some research on her. And really, if you look at it, you know, you got to give the devil their due. She did some good stuff back in the day, you know, like when she worked for the ACLU, which the ACLU is pretty much a communist organization, but she did some good stuff. You know, it's like I remember when I was young, like I had an aunt that raised me. You know, she raised her two boys. She was divorced. You know, she raised me and my brother. We were orphans, and so the four of us, you know, it was pretty hard for a single woman in the 60s to raise four children, you know, and I remember even back then, she telling me that, you know, she worked in an office with a bunch of men, and that she did a lot of the job, you know, she worked the same position a lot of the other men worked, and she didn't get paid what they got paid. You know, there was a thing back in the day that when most women tended to stay home, and especially white women, you know, black women didn't really do this, but white women tended to stay home and support them for the most part. And so there was this bias where, you know, when someone in my aunt's position, she wasn't treated fairly. You know, there was a lot of gender injustice, you know, back then. But Ginsburg, you know, actually did some good stuff. You know, I mean, she got a lot of that in the early 70s, filed lawsuits and got a lot of that straightened out. You know, she even helped men. I mean, there were situations where, like, there was this one guy that his wife made most of the money, and he stayed at home, kept the house. Well, he didn't work. You know, that seems kind of strange to me. A guy at that during that time not working. You know. But anyway, his wife died in childbirth, and he had to raise the child. Well, he wanted her Social Security, and because he never worked, you know, and so they wouldn't give him Social Security, you know, and he had had to raise a child. So she went to bat for him and got the Social Security, her Social Security to go to him, you know, to help raise the child, which I think that's a fair deal, you know. And there was a situation where a woman worked at Goodyear for many years back in the day.
Hold on a second.
Okay.
So did that set the precedence for Social Security going forward, where they pay the spouse, either spouse?
I think so. I think it had a lot to do, you know, with that. You know, here's the thing. People push for the Equal Rights Amendment, okay, which I think was unnecessary. I still think unnecessary. You know, because much of the stuff that an Equal Rights Amendment would have done for women has been done. You know, women dominate colleges now. You know, there's more women going to college than there is men. Women are, you know, in the workplace everywhere. There's a natural.
When was that law enacted for equal
Well,
rights?
there were different laws that she dealt with that over time in the late 60s, early 70s that started ironing these things out. I'm not saying she did everything, but she had a lot of impact on that period.
During what time period?
Late 60s, early 70s.
That law would be relevant to that time period because during the 60s, women were not being treated the same.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So in other words, you're saying it sounded like you said it got done anyway.
Well, no. I meant what I meant was that the things that the ERA would have Equal Rights Amendment would have addressed. Now, I've heard. I don't want to speak, out of my hind end here, but I've heard there's a lot of things in the Equal Rights Amendment that you wouldn't want. I've never really looked at it, so I can't really say what's in the Equal Rights Amendment. But what I'm saying is that you taking the civil rights era. Black people couldn't go in to eat in diners. They couldn't get certain jobs, all this. What the 64 Civil Rights Bill did, all it did was basically do the things that the 14th Amendment was intended to do, okay, which by the people interfering with the rule of law, they delayed black people from getting the rights guaranteed to them in the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law. All the 64 is really redundant. I mean, it just did what the 14th Amendment was supposed to have done, okay? So same way with the 15th Amendment, right to vote. The 65 Voting Rights Act gave black people the right to vote, which that's what they had achieved in 1870, So basically what I'm saying is, though, the difference here is that through litigation, different lawyers were able to smooth out those areas where women weren't being treated equally, at least on a monetary level, as far as jobs and things. Well, give me another example. I mean, where women were able to get out of jobs traditionally set aside for women, like secretarial work and, nursing and stuff like that. For example, Ginsburg even helped men because a lot of men were wanting to get in the nursing profession, and usually they leaned toward hiring women because that was a traditional job. Like when I was a kid, it was a rarity. I don't know if I ever saw a male nurse. The only time you might see a male nurse is in a psychiatric ward. And that was probably because they needed the muscle, to deal with unruly patients. But I don't think I ever saw a male nurse until in the last 20 years, maybe 20, 30 years, So it kind of went, it crossed over on both sides. She helped both sexes kind of break those disparities among gender roles type thing. Well, I was getting ready to say.
I'm sorry. I want to ask you something else. So, some of these amendments are redundant.
Yeah.
In terms of what we already is pre-existing.
Right.
So why do they come up with an amendment? Why not go back to?
Well, here's the way I look at it.
To argue in court.
I believe that 14th Amendment was primarily intended for black people or the former slaves, because there was a question of that had been raised about their citizenship as Americans. Okay. That was by the 1857 Dred Scott decision.
Well, then I could see that.
Yeah, I mean, the 14th Amendment, ended that debate. Yeah. Okay. And then
that needed to exist because it's bringing up citizenship,
right?
As an issue, which makes sense. But go back to women for a second, and how that pre-exists, and why.
Well, I think the problem with women is that it says all men are created equal, and of course I look at that to me all humankind.
Right. which is what I think they intended.
But I think because of the way women were viewed at one time, they didn't consider they felt like they needed that definition to be and something in writing defining that women were part of the rule of law, and I think that's where the ERA comes in, but it was, I think, I suspect that the ERA was a product of the radical feminist movement. I think that's one reason they've had so much opposition to it over the years, But and that's another thing too. Radical feminism has screwed this country up. I'm a feminist because I'm all for. I hate injustice. I don't care if I see a woman being mistreated, like in the pay, as far as pay and about being able to get a job or whatever, that she's capable of doing. But I've seen both sides of it. As a supervisor, when I worked at a company in Rutherford County, where 75% of the women who worked there, that I was a supervisor over a crew that it was composed of about 75% women and about 25% men. I have seen situations where women will use their sex to get out of work. I've seen situations where, they during this time, the 70s and 80s, when they opened these jobs up, we had a position, for example, it was called a utility position. Women, when I first went to work there, women were not allowed to, well, I'm not saying they weren't allowed, but there were very few women in a utility position. Most of the women were line operators, okay? But once they started letting women into the utility position, because that paid more money, because it was a harder job, I don't know if you call it harder, but it was more physical. What started happening is that we had like a room where you had to pick up 100-pound bags of Epsom salt, throw it into you had to beat it up with a long steel bar, and pick that bag up and throw it in a hopper. What started happening is women couldn't handle that job because of the physical strength needed, and so they were allowed to go and do other utility jobs that weren't as strenuous, but the men had to double up doing the job that before they were it was one of the worst jobs in the plant. So what we would do is like rotate people out there every day, in order to give them a break. If you worked in there one day, you didn't want to work in 2 days in a row, But what was happening, where the women were refusing to work in there, we were having to put men in there more and more often, and it was causing a morale problem, So, this stuff works both ways, Women sometimes can use their sex to make things be out of kilter, so to speak, But anyway, getting back to her, I think she did some good things. I mean, I can't fault her on some of the things she did back, years ago that helped get women and men more equality in the workplace type stuff. Okay. But I think, Ginsburg, when you look at her, she had a lot of good qualities. She was a good family woman. She made sure there were plenty of quality time for her daughters and things like that, her and her husband. And so they seemed to raise them with good values and everything. But here, but the problem I have with somebody like Ginsburg, that once she got on the court, is that she started, she was one of these leftists that believed that the Constitution was a living document. It was a living Constitution. And all that is it gives a left-wing judge the permission to interpret the Constitution any way they want to, and to just pull a decision out of the air, and then they become they're no longer judges at that point. They're just legislators. And see, that wasn't the power. The founding fathers did not give that power to these people, but
when did that begin, that process? And I know it goes back a long way.
Well, it goes back
when Supreme Court stuck their opinions in where they should not have.
Well, it started with John Marshall. Okay,
what year is that?
1803. It goes way back. Okay, it wasn't something that a leftist did 100 years ago. It happened a long time ago.
Right.
And basically what happened was, well, first of all, let me just say this before we get off the living Constitution deal. I don't believe the Constitution is living. I believe that the founding fathers gave us the machinery to amend the Constitution if it needed to be amended. Okay, and first of all, let me just say this too. One thing I learned in college. One of the myths that you hear out there is that we have three co-equal branches of government. We do not. The legislature is in Article 1 of the Constitution. Reason it's Article 1 because it denotes that the legislature is supposed to be the most powerful branch of government. Okay, and I think the reason for that is because they make the laws. Okay, executive is the second most powerful in government, and then the judicial is in Article 3, which denotes it's the least powerful of all. But what is the judicial today? It's probably the most powerful, because no matter what the Congress does or what the president does, if the Supreme Court comes up and says, you're wrong, then everybody does what the Supreme Court, or they look at what the Supreme Court says is law. And if the founding fathers had known what the Supreme Court was going to become, I feel like they might even have left the third branch of government out of the Constitution. I don't even know if they would have had a judicial branch of the government. Matter of fact, there were some founders that didn't want to put it in the Constitution, because it was basically what they meant for the Supreme Court to do, or the judicial branch to do, is if Congress and the president came to loggerheads on an issue, they were supposed to interpret to be kind of like a referee. They would say, a referee that didn't really have any power. They would basically let them know, okay, Congress, you're right here. You're upholding the Constitution. Or the president, they could say to him, okay, you're right here. You're upholding the Constitution. They were there to advise them and for them to make, come to some kind of agreement, But they were never supposed to have the power to say this is constitutional, this is constitutional, and that's it. No debate. You got to do what we say. That was never the intent of the founding fathers. Now going back, well, before I go to what I was getting ready to say. Let's see. Hold on. Okay, this is what Thomas Jefferson said about what he was afraid the Supreme Court might become. He said in a letter to Marshall, this is what he wrote after the 1803 Marbury versus Madison decision. He said, you seem to consider the judges as the ultimate arbiters of all constitutional questions. A very dangerous doctrine indeed, and one which would place us under the despotism of an oligarchy. Our judges are as honest as other men, and not more so. They have with others the same passion for party, for power, and privilege of the core. Their power is the more dangerous, as they are in office for life and not responsible, as the other functionaries are, to the elective control. The Constitution has erected no such single tribunal, knowing that to whatever hands confided with the corruption of time and party, its members would become despots. You know what a despot is, okay? It has more wisely made all the departments co-equal and co-sovereign within themselves. James Madison also said that checks and balances serve to preserve liberty by ensuring justice. Justice is the end of government. What he meant, that is the means to an end. And it is also the end of civil society. In other words, civil society and government are driven by the rule of law, or they are defined by the rule of law, and basically what he was saying. Now, getting back to your question, what had happened, there was a guy named Marbury who, well, let me just say this. John Adams had been elected president in 1796, and he was defeated for re-election in 1800, okay? So Thomas Jefferson, a very tumultuous election that almost caused us to go to blows, kind of like the situation we're in now, won by a very close situation, okay? And so what happened was Adams made what they call midnight appointments. He made some last-minute, as president, last-minute job appointments for different people that were Federalists. You know, you had the Federalists and you had the Anti-Federalists. And that's what Adams was, a Federalist. So anyway, so he made this guy Justice of the Peace, okay? Well, when Jefferson got in there, he wouldn't let him have the job, okay? And so Marbury filed a court case that went before the Supreme Court. And basically what Marbury was saying, what Marshall was saying to Marbury was, first of all, you picked the wrong court to argue your case in. You have this court has no jurisdiction over your situation. But basically the way he configured the decision, because he didn't, on the one hand, you know, Marshall was a Federalist. He didn't want to make the new president mad at him, but at the same time, he was able to come up with a decision that that would give him more power. It gave him the power of what do you call it? Judicial review. Okay, which is where we're at now. Okay, the power of judicial review. That's where most scholars believe that the power of judicial review started, was with this case. Okay, and so what happened from that point on, every time when the Supreme Court decided a case, it became law. And this is exactly what the Founding Fathers did not want to happen, okay? And that's
when Supreme Court does that now, even currently.
But let me just, I'll let you speak, but I just want to finish one point. When I was talking about what Jefferson was saying to Marshall, he wrote this letter to Marshall warning about this is the power that we don't want to happen, okay? He was directing his comments toward Marshall, you know, and warning about what would happen if we allowed a court to have that power, and exactly what has happened, you know. So anyway, go ahead. What was you going to say?
So when they do this, the Supreme Court does what is it classified as? Is it a ruling, or is it what do they call that? When the Supreme Court comes up with a decision?
I would just call it a ruling. They decide what their interpretation of the Constitution is, and
which is not just.
For example, you know,
it's not. I mean, it's an opinion, but it's considered the final.
It's the final say on it.
It's the final say on it.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, the Congress, if they want to take on their responsibilities and seriously in the way they're in the Constitution, they can amend the Constitution and overrule what the judges said, okay? But here's the thing. What good does it do? If you allow the judicial review, what good does it do to even pass an amendment? Look at the 14th Amendment, okay, in Plessy versus Ferguson. In 1896, you had a guy named Plessy, Homer Plessy, that he was 1/8 black, okay? And he wanted to sit in the white section of a train in Louisiana, okay? They said he couldn't sit there, okay? It's kind of like, what's her name, Rosa Parks, you know? Yep. They made him move, okay? He filed suit and went before the Supreme Court. Oh, he was asking for protection on the Equal Protection Clause of to end segregation in the South of the 14th Amendment. Well, what the judges did, now they had an amendment there. They had an amendment that spelled out in black and white what was supposed to happen, and they decided this case based on their opinion rather than the Constitution. And so what they came up with was what they called separate but equal. It was a rationale that was saying, okay, as long as you can provide blacks with equal facilities, transportation facilities, you can keep the races separate. That's not what the 14th Amendment's talking about.
Right.
So that's what I'm saying. You know, when the judges do not go by the law, they screw everything up. You know, look what happened to black people. Black people had to deal with segregation for almost another 100 years before it was finally done away with. You know, and see this, and then when you get into the modern era, then you come up with this idea of a living constitution. Well, if you got one side they call the ones like me or somebody like Judge Thomas, who else? Scalia or somebody like that, they call us constructionists.
Right.
We believe that the Constitution, as much as possible, should be taken literally, you know. Where then you got these people over here that believe in you can just interpret it whatever you think it means. And you got two sides that are diametrically opposed. So if one wins out and he doesn't go by the Constitution, there's a good chance that everything's going to be screwed up.
This is why the Supreme Court today is completely politicized.
Absolutely. Like this fight we're having right now over Ginsburg, the fight we had over Kavanaugh, the fight we've had over all these different judges in the past, which is funny. You don't really have this fight. Ginsburg, they didn't have a fight over Ginsburg because the Republicans don't fight over things like this. They look at her qualifications instead of her ideas and vote her in based on her qualifications, which to me that's wrong, because you should never have someone on the Supreme Court that does not believe in going by the Constitution. Right. You know, but that's the Republicans for you, okay? But Democrats are totally different. They're going to fight tooth and nail, and and that's what's happened. And they'll say, well, the Republicans are not bipartisan enough. Well, heck, that they interpret bipartisanship as giving in to them. You give in to them, then that's bipartisanship.
So Ginsburg essentially did what anybody else would do, with the tools that they have in front of them. If they're all doing it and she comes into the Supreme Court, she's going to act the same way.
Oh, absolutely, but she believed that. That's
rule
the
by
way
her
she
opinions and fight. Use radical left whenever she needed to do it.
Right, but that's the way. Well, to give you some idea. Ginsburg believed in so-called separation of church and state. That doesn't exist. That concept does not exist in the Constitution of the United States. Separation of church and state was taken from a letter from Thomas Jefferson to the Danbury Baptist. Okay. There is a separation of church and state, but it's between the national government and the state. It's not between. It doesn't. The individual gets to determine how he wants to worship, and the state gets to determine how they want to worship. For example, if the state of Tennessee wanted to say, I'm not advocating this, but I'm just saying, if they wanted to say that Baptists are going to be a state religion and they voted on it, they would have that right under the Constitution. If the people of the state of Tennessee went along with that and voted it in. Or they could say, okay, we want to have prayer as in school, every day. We want to cite the Pledge of Allegiance. They have that right under the Constitution. They want a nativity scene on their, the state capitol grounds. They want what they call the Jewish thing at during what's the Jewish holiday at Christmas? Hanukkah. What do they call that? Those candles or whatever. Menorah. If they want a menorah on the state, and the state of Tennessee was okay with that, they could do that. They wanted a mosque, on the state capitol ground. If that's what the people of the state of Tennessee wanted, they could do that under the original Constitution or the original First Amendment. But what happened in 1947 was that the Supreme Court, led by a racist KKK member named Hugo Black, okay.
That's ironic.
He had an anti-Catholic bias, and that colored his decision, about a case that came before him where, I believe it was in New Jersey, the parents were having their children go back and forth to school on city buses, and some of them were Catholic students, some of them were, just regular public school students. But what the city was doing, they were paying. Let's see, how was it working? They were using city buses to transport students back and forth to school, and the parents, I think the way it worked, the parents were reimbursed, or I can't remember, or maybe it was the city government paid the bus company, okay, for this, and they were using tax money to do it. And so this guy didn't like it because Catholics were being transported on these city buses to school. So they filed a suit, and of course Hugo Black, being a former KKK guy, that KKK not only didn't like black people, they didn't like Jews, and they didn't like Catholics. So I think this had a lot of bearing on his decision. But what he did by making that decision and coming up with this bogus idea of church and state, which has been with us ever since, to where now nobody can pray in school, nobody can have a a nativity scene on the courthouse lawn or 10 commandments over the judge's bench or whatever. This stupid idea of separation of church, which is not freedom of religion, the freedom from religion, you know. This was, you can go back to 1947 in Everson versus the Board of Education. Now, to get to Ginsburg, this is what Ginsburg believed in. She believed in the 47 case. Prior to 47, every First Amendment case that went before the Supreme Court, they came down on the side of the Constitution, okay? But after 47, all these cases went with this bogus rulings the precedent set by Everson versus Board of Education in 47. Then you had in like 62 and 63, you had two famous cases. I can't remember the name of them, but back to back, which ended prayer in school, you know. So Ginsburg always came down on separation of church and state. Another ruling that she was in the majority was Lawrence versus the state of Texas. What this was in the state of Texas, these police made a bust on a house. I think it was a drug bust. Well, when they went in, one of the police officers saw two men having sex, okay? So he arrested them under the sodomy law of the state of Texas. So the ACLU, I think, was sued, basically saying that you know, this violated the what do you call it, the equal protection law of the 14th Amendment, which Ginsburg was in the majority on that case. Well, what that case did in 2003 was set us up for same-sex marriage, okay? It also set us up for, it laid the groundwork for if you wanted to bring a case considering polygamy, if you wanted to bring a case that a father wanted to marry their daughter or a mother wanted to marry their son, or they wanted to marry their German Shepherd. And now we're dealing with pedophilia, you know, which they're pushing. Under that ruling, they laid the groundwork, because basically what they're saying is, rather than same-sex, rather than homosexuality being a mental disorder or learned behavior, its behavior now is protected under the 14th Amendment. That is a bad precedent. Okay, Ginsburg came out on top with that. Okay, her and a bunch of others. Okay, then you had
that's a huge one.
Yeah, it's a big one, and that year, 2003, in the state of Massachusetts, 66. They did a poll. 66% of people in Massachusetts, liberal as can be, voted Ted Kennedy in over and over and over. They were against same-sex marriage. But the Supreme Court of the state of Massachusetts ruled that very year after that Supreme Court case that same-sex marriage could be legal, okay? Now, during that time, prior to that and after that, you had referendums all over the country. Everywhere, even in crazy California, they voted down same-sex marriage. But then the Supreme Court came along just a few years ago, I think under Obama, and ruled same-sex marriage. Again, Ginsburg was on all of that, was legal. Here's the deal. Where I differ with that is, again, behavior should not be under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, and marriage is a state issue. You know, each state. I didn't go get married. I didn't go to the federal courthouse to get my marriage license. I went to the state or the county courthouse. All of a sudden we put marriage on a federal level.
Classic overreaching.
Overreaching. Okay. Then you had, let's see, course, Roe v. Wade, of course, she didn't have anything but passing that, but she was always for the woman's right to choose, okay? So Roe v. Wade, what it did was, again, the way they justified Roe v. Wade was by saying that a woman had a right to privacy. There's nowhere in the Constitution you can show me a right to privacy. That's something they pulled out of thin air. And these court cases surrounding Roe v. Wade justified abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy. We've had, everybody talks now about these laws in New York and other states where they gleefully passed them saying that you could abort a baby up to birth. Okay, we've had that ever since Roe v. Wade. Yep. And the way they get around that is, of course, in the first trimester, I don't think you have to have a doctor's permission to get a first trimester abortion, but you do on the second and third. And the way you get around that is just to say, well, it's stressing me out. And the doctor can give you a medical excuse to get a late-term abortion, or it's making me depressed, or they can use that as a medical cover to have a late-term abortion. So they've been doing partial birth abortions for years, and probably not that many, but the fact is that Roe v. Wade legalized infanticide, and whether you want to call it, we've had over 60 million people killed through abortion. That's almost as many people who died under the hands of the communists. In the 20th century, they estimate over 100 million people were killed by Stalin and Mao Zedong and all those guys, Pol Pot. But yet we don't blink an eye at killing all these kids, Over 20 million of them have been black. And the whole purpose of Planned Parenthood from the get-go was to, not the whole purpose, but one of the purposes was to exterminate the black race. And in places like New York City, more black kids are aborted in New York City than are born, okay? But Ginsburg was all behind that. And then you had another case called Kill versus City of New London. This case was 2005, and Ginsburg was involved in that. I think Ginsburg came on the court in 93, so anything after 93 she was involved with. And this was a case where, let's say like your house, it's called an eminent domain. Let's say your house, if they decided to put a road through where your house was, the government would come to you and they'd say, we need that land to put this road through, and then they'd offer you supposedly a market value price for your land. Okay, that's the way eminent domain works. But what this law did was, or what this court decision did was to say, let's say Walmart comes into your neighborhood and they want your land, okay? So, or let's say it's several small businesses and they want their land, okay? They can make the argument under eminent domain, which to me is totally bogus, that because Walmart is such a big corporation, and that if they build this big super center, they're going to employ all these people and they're going to increase the tax base, which is good for the community. Okay, so this is how they've taken something that was constitutional and expanded it to be unconstitutional. No private business should benefit from eminent domain. It should only be when the government needs your land to make a road, to build a bridge, something where the community all will benefit from. So this again, where the people who believe in the Constitution being a living document were able to totally distort the Constitution. Yeah. And I hate to say this, but Trump has benefited from this eminent domain. He believes in this new interpretation. I don't agree with him on that, but he can't be right on everything. Of course, the Obamacare ruling, she was involved in that, and basically what was at stake here was that they were forcing people to buy insurance, buy a product they did not want. It'd be like the government saying to you, you've got to have a Rolex watch whether you want it or not, okay? That, to me, is unconstitutional. The way they were able to get around that was that if you didn't buy it, then you would be fined. So what was happening, you had the right to refuse to buy insurance, but you were going to get fined for not having insurance. Okay, so the way they got around that was the United States government under the Constitution has the right to tax. Okay, so what people like John Roberts, scumbag, said is that a fine is a tax. So being a fine is a tax, that's how they was able to get around, the Constitution. But what has Obamacare done? Obamacare is destroying the greatest healthcare system in the world, and it's making healthcare costs skyrocket. And very few people are benefiting from it. But anyway. So these are some of the rulings that she's been involved with, and but I'm not just picking on Ginsburg because there's a whole lot of left-wing politicians or left-wing court justices out there that believe the same way she does, and but this idea of judicial review was never supposed to be put into the Constitution. And you got to look at how many times, just think about it. Just think about how many times court cases have screwed this country over. And, it helped to solidify, bring on the Civil War with the Dred Scott decision. And then it justified and legalized segregation, which is another form of slavery, for almost 100 more years. And look, it's been responsible for the death of millions of people, and through abortion, and through it's turned the First Amendment on its head regarding religious freedom. So, this is why it's very important that we get somebody good on the Supreme Court. But again, we're back to square one. What we've talked a lot about on this show is the fact that even if Trump wins, or whether he does or he doesn't, at some point, the Democrats are going to come in and they're going to stack the Supreme Court. They're going to put as many people on the Supreme, and they can do it legally. Put them on the Supreme Court and outweigh any conservative opposition that's on that court, and but they've got to get the Senate back. They've got to get the whole Congress back. They got to get the presidency back, But not only that, they're gonna, they can do that. They can do away with the filibuster. They can do away with the Electoral College. But once they do all that, it's over with. America will no longer. I don't think a Republican will ever be elected again.
Why do you think that they just were never up to the this final step of where they are now? Like, why didn't they push for this? It was actually more ripe, going back within the last decade and a decade before that. They could have done this.
Well,
if all the chips, if everything was lined up correctly.
Well, I don't know that the country was really ready for it. In other words, I think now we're seeing a whole lot of we have the results of a generation or more that have been indoctrinated that are leaning toward socialism. They're looking at
it comes back to that slow burn of indoctrinating getting into the colleges, getting into the K through 12.
And they've threatened to do it for a long time. I mean, they've threatened to stack the Supreme Court for years. But I think everything's just coming together. They're starting to see that right now is the best time. But look, tell you, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, they wouldn't even be in this situation if Ruth Bader Ginsburg had, like back when she first got cancer, just decided then when I think she got it while Clinton was president, I believe, or Obama, I can't remember. But
I mean, they had an opportunity.
Yeah, if she'd have just stepped down in and let Obama pick somebody to replace her.
Right.
But she wanted to hold on. I guess she wanted to fight the good fight, And now, and see, that's another thing, too. In 2016, I think the reason she didn't step down is because she thought Hillary was going to win, just like a lot of them did.
Definitely.
And see, that's what's funny to look at is that Obama left a lot of vacancies on everything because he thought Hillary was going to replace everything.
Yep.
And then you had the Supreme Court. So when Trump got in there,
threw a major wrench.
He was able to do a major renovation. And they weren't expecting that. But that just shows how cocky and how much hubris they have. So.
Well, yeah, they've escalated to this. This is almost like that KGB clip from the '80s. So this is step 4, the final step for them, and then of course Trump comes out of nowhere, as a surprise. But I still go back to we've you and I go back and forth on this, but that awakening for people like myself who were inactive or have been quiet for so long.
See,
that sleeping giant is now becoming aware. I know the word is not out there because of the media control, but that sleeping giant is waking up.
Well, rationally, I see what could turn into an overwhelming landslide. Okay.
Well, I'm going beyond this election.
Well, I know, but what I'm saying is, though, if that happens, it could have long range possibilities because people are getting a taste of what could happen if they get in power. Okay,
right.
And it may even affect their. See, one of the things. This is what people don't realize. And Rush brought this up down the show, and he's totally right. Is that in 2018, the reason the Democrats won so many seats and was able to take over the House in 2018 was that over 50-something Republicans decided not to even run again. Okay, so they stepped down, and that's why they were able to get in, because incumbency is powerful. And so, if they had decided to stay in power or stay to run, they would have probably, most of them, been reelected. Okay, Democrats wouldn't have had that big a shot. But look what happened to the Senate in 2018. They gained seats. They won 4 seats just because the American people were mad at them over the way they treated Kavanaugh. Okay, so they gained seats in the Senate.
Yep.
Okay, same way with 2010. Okay, in 2008, the Democrats controlled the House and the Senate. Okay, and they rammed through Obamacare.
When did the Tea Party kick up?
right before Bush went out of office. It started up as actually, Tea Party was coming in to protest the policies of the Bush administration, okay? And then, of course, when Obama came in there, he was all about raising taxes and, the big spending and all this stuff. And so they grew stronger during that time. But what I was getting ready to say, in 2008, actually into the 2009 when they took office, they were able to ram through Obamacare. The American people, polls were showing the American people, 3/4 of the American people did not want Obamacare, okay? But they knew this was their shot. They knew that they had this, the Senate and the Congress, and that if they were going to get it done, because here's the way bureaucracies work. Once you get them in, you can't get rid of them, and they knew that, okay? And they had always wanted national health insurance. So they forced it through. They got through one vote. There were no Republican votes, okay? So guess what? 2010, the Republicans gained back the House. Why did they gain it back? As a result of the way the Democrats ignored the American people over Obamacare.
You mean the Senate, don't you?
No, the House.
House? Okay.
Now the Democrats still had the Senate, okay? So they got the House back, okay, because of the anger over Obamacare and also illegal immigration. So from 2010 to 2014, the do-nothing Republicans, okay, who were not doing what the American people put them in there to do, get rid of Obamacare and get rid of illegal immigration, kept saying, oh, wait a minute, the reason we can't get anything done because the Senate, we need the Senate. So what happened in 2014, they gave them the Senate. And again, 2010, 2014, you had a do-nothing Republican Congress that would not follow the wishes of their constituents that voted them in, okay? And like I said, they were even willing, if the Republicans had not, in 2016, if they had not in the House, so many of them resigned and quit, they would have still held on to the Republican Congress, and like I say, they gained seats in the Senate. So what I'm getting at here is we are so bombarded daily with the mainstream media, the left wing noise machine that tries to make us feel like we're in the minority when we are in the majority. Right. Okay, but what you got is you got people out there pushing their leaders to do the things they want them to do, but they won't do it. I believe if the Republicans had the courage to do the right things more than they do, they would never have to worry about being defeated. But they won't. They're just, I don't know what it is about the Republican Party. It's like they don't know how to lead, And then you got a guy named Trump who comes in there. He is a leader, He's doing the very things that we wanted him to do, to stand up to them, to talk back to them, right. To get things done,
It's also uncovering the Republicans and exposing them, to stand up and do their job.
It exposes them for being do nothing group of people.
I think we're lucky that the Democrats have made some major mistakes. Even in this year, so far, they've. This is why. No, go ahead. I'm sorry. Well, just promoting BLM,
right,
for instance, was really backfiring horribly, and the dark money coming from Soros and everything, activating Antifa and paying for transportation and doing all that stuff and fees. It's backfiring. This is what is waking up the
Well,
American,
see, that's what
American
I'm saying.
people.
You
can only hide that. You can't. The
Yeah.
Democrats not talking about violence at the convention is not going to hide the fact that there's violence all over the place.
Well, see, I don't think, although I think I never underestimate the stupidity of the American people. I really think they're not as dumb as what people make them out to be, and they see this. You got a rise in gun sales. You got a rise. Polls show that people are worried about these people coming to their houses and shouting them down and threatening them and all that. So people's security is involved. So rationally, I'm thinking this could be a record turnout, a record defeat for the Democrats. Okay, not only for president, for in the Congress. Okay, that my rational brain is telling me that all the things are in place for that to happen.
Right.
Okay. Emotionally, because it's been such a traumatic year with this disease and all that, I am terrified. It's not so much I'm terrified of dying or terrified of the word I'm trying to say here is that I'm terrified for losing the freedom that I've always enjoyed. Mm-hmm. I want to go out of here, in my old age, living in a country that's still free. Mm-hmm. That's what terrifies me. So emotionally, I don't know how this election is going to turn out. Rationally, I see all the pieces in place to have possibly a big landslide victory.
I agree.
So there we are.
I think it's action and reaction. I don't think we're going to see anything like what we're about to see.
Yeah,
that's happened before, and because the left has been so extreme, and now they're at the end of their project, and all the buttons are pushed, everything is in full gear, and they'll turn it up more.
Right.
But I think there'll be a reaction to all of those things. We've never seen anything like this before.
No,
so,
I've never seen anything in my lifetime.
People react. I only started waking up in 2016 for that, and people are gradually coming around. It's a slow burn, but I think that even against the media, I think it's they're waking up,
right,
and they're beginning to see what is really going on.
Well,
so I'm hoping if we can get that momentum, and then we get out get the dead wood out of Congress and out of the Senate in that wave.
Well,
then we may have a shot. We'll always be. It's not like we're pushing against back from the '60s to step 1 to step 2 of socialism. They're right. Everything is in place. All the district attorneys are all the liberal cities. They're all in place. Everything has been paid for, and they're pushing against this thing now like never before. So they weren't in those positions, but now they are.
I think that's what scares me more than anything is seeing them infiltrate the infrastructure of this country.
They have. It's been
and all
unchecked.
the money behind them and their tactics.
Yep.
In 1968,
it wasn't like that.
The country was going crazy, but the infrastructure was still pretty much the old infrastructure. Yeah. Okay.
We didn't have FBI infiltration and school system infiltration. Now you do. They're
you did, but not to the extent you got it now.
Look at that district attorney with what's the couple's name who came out of the house?
Yeah,
and the district attorney there.
But you've got those district attorneys all over the country.
You do, but just as one example, her private investigator who works for her, who collects information for the DA's office. He's ex-FBI.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
They're all out there. They're all being paid and financed, and this is what they're building.
And I know from studying history that, a small group can overthrow a government, and but on the other hand, whenever American government has gone too far one way, especially to the left, they tend to react to that, and they tend to.
That's what I mean by the
you
action,
have a
reaction.
backlash to it, and I think that's what we're about to see.
I agree. I think that's where we're going.
But all right, well, I think anybody got anything else? So, all right, well, I guess I'll say the prayer. Lord Jesus, thank you for all the blessings you've given us, Lord. We thank you for the blessings you're going to give us. And Lord, we pray that this podcast will reach somebody that is on the fence, Lord, that will move them in a positive direction. Lord, we don't know what your will is for this country. We worry about it. We want it to go in the right direction, Lord. But your will is something we don't understand a lot of times, and so we just pray that, Lord, we can accept your will, whatever that might be. But we just ask that you protect the people of this country, all the people, and help to change minds, Lord, that of those people out there that have gone to the dark side, Lord. Help to do something to help bring them back, Lord. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.